What's up, guys? Today I want to tell you about a secret Advaita Vedanta master that many of you interested in the field have probably never heard of. And that would be Robert Adams, an American. When I discovered him years ago, I already knew about Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta. So when a random video popped up on my feed about this guy who studied with Ramana directly, I had to investigate. From his fascinating story, I found out that he was an enlightened being. And so I bought his book, Silence of the Heart, to find out how true that was. It turned out to be top-tier, S-class, non-duality material. You've got to add it to your Advaita canon, so I'm going to share it with you guys today. First off, let's establish who is Robert Adams so that you understand his credibility, and then I want to give you some examples of his teachings. He was born in 1928 in New York City, died in 1997. And as a baby, until the age of 7, he would see an image of a miniature 2-foot-tall man at the foot of his cradle in bed. And this man would speak to him either in a different language or simply unintelligibly. This is a key detail you'll see soon. By that age, he developed a siddhi, a supernormal power, called prakamya, whereby he could basically manifest anything that he desired, just by saying God's name 3 times. The reason this is important is because one day, when he was 14 taking a math test, he did this again per usual. But instead of getting the answers for his test, he simply entered self-realization right on the spot. He explains the whole experience in chapter 3 called Awakening. Basically, all of a sudden his consciousness started expanding from his body and becoming the light of the entire universe. A brilliant light of which he was the center and also the circumference. The planets, stars, and galaxies all felt like his self. After this reached completion, he simply entered the pure awareness beyond time, space, light, and darkness. When he returned from this experience, he understood directly that everything was I. The word I encompassed everything in the universe. The editor phrases this in the introduction as realizing that the world was no longer real to him. He could see only his self, the immutable, all-penetrating, all-prevailing source of existence. All things, the body, the world, the mind, were only images superimposed on the unchangeable self. In themselves, they had no real existence. I really liked the way they worded this, so I wanted to include that for those of you who don't know what exactly self-realization entails. Now, to clarify a few things before we move on, because it sounds dubious for an American 14-year-old to just suddenly attain enlightenment for no reason. First of all, when you see his teachings, you will believe this is true. The proof is in the satsang pudding. But second, this is exactly what happened to Ramana Maharshi, if you're not familiar with his enlightenment story. He also suddenly, at the age of 16, without any sadhana, had a strange death-like experience that caused him to realize his self-nature, which he described as a current. This happened at his uncle's house in Madurai, southern India, and the editor of Be As You Are, David Godman, says that he became consciously aware for the first time that his real nature was imperishable, and that it was unrelated to the body, the mind, or the personality. His consciousness of being an individual person ceased to exist, and it never functioned in him again. For all of you perplexed spiritual seekers out there, I'm going to explain to you how this mode of realization is possible before we move on, because I don't think many people know the metaphysical basis. In Buddhism, they actually teach that there are 4 degrees of enlightenment, and this is implied in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras as well. How far you go depends on how many of the 10 karmic chains you break, called Sangyojana. The reason this applies to our story is because if you reach the first level, called stream entry, then you're guaranteed by universal law to be reborn no more than 7 times, if you don't attain complete nirvana by the end of your lifespan. So the stories of both Robert and Ramana tell me that they both attained some degree of realization in a previous lifetime, either Sotapanna or Sakadagami, once a returner, such that the awakening happened almost automatically in this subsequent lifetime. That's how that works. And for those of you who are fans of Sadhguru, this should illuminate for you why it's possible that this is his 3rd enlightened incarnation, previously having been Shiva Yogi, and then also Sadhguru Sri Brahma immediately before this last lifetime. The reason these three masters didn't require any sadhana or barely any sort of external influence is because your consciousness is already within the stream of God. So it doesn't get caught up in the self-ignorance that brings about body identification and conceptual entanglement. And it's much easier to naturally enter the self-nature once again. And I say all of this because it helps you understand better how it's possible that Robert Adams was so conscious as a baby that he had strong memory, just like Sadhguru Vasudev. Now let's carry on with the rest of the story. So he has this crazy experience in math class. Gets a 0 on his math test, obviously. He comes to his senses with his teacher shaking him awake, or unawake if you want to be meta. And this experience totally changes his life, as you might think. Just imagine what you were doing at age 14, watching anime, after school sports, and then suddenly adding God realization to all of that. Now here's the crazy thing. He happens to find a copy of Who Am I, Nan-Yar by Ramana Maharshi one day. And if any of you have one of his books, like Be As You Are, you'll know that it has his photograph on the cover. Well, he realized right then and there that the man on the cover was none other than the sketchy little 2-foot being that hung out with him for the first 7 years of his life. And this is one of the reasons I say that Robert Adams was most likely a disciple of Ramana Maharshi in his most previous life, attained an initial level of self-realization, passed away, and then became reborn in America in 1928. This isn't even the end of the story though. It does get better. 2 years after this whole experience, probably 1944, he went to become a disciple of the famous Yogananda and wanted to become a monk at the Self-Realization Fellowship in California. But Yogananda told him that he needed to go to see Ramana Maharshi, whose ashram was in Tiruvannamalai, India. He stayed with Ramana for 3 years until his death, and then afterward, Robert traveled around India for the next 17 years, gaining clarity on the philosophy behind his experience, finally settling in Sedona, Arizona in America, because of a vision that instructed him to start teaching people. Okay, so that's the brief story, and this book is actually a collection of talks from his satsangs during that period of time. And it wasn't even published until after his death in 1997. Now let's look at a few examples of his teachings. Number 1, do not react to anything. Quote, think of the experiences you went through today and see if you do not believe that you are a doer. How many times did you become angry today? How many times did you feel slighted today? How many times did you feel fear or something is wrong somewhere or you're not in the right place? This shows that you believe that you are a body. This is a great practical way of revealing the nature of our belief in personal self. It's evidenced in our reactions. It's one thing to be taught and agree that you must not be something called the body, but an entirely different matter to actually know how to work with that knowledge to deconstruct it. And this is one way, ghosting reactions from your mind field. So the teaching is to practice not reacting, not allowing reactions. In other words, abandoning the personal self that wants to arise in light of falsely interpreting experience as real. This is classified as pratyahara, guarding the sense doors, or appropriate attention in Buddhism. The rationale is that unlike an enlightened person, you can only get emotionally reactive to things if you still believe you are a personal self or body. Why? Because it means you still think that there are real objects and a limited referent to receive them, neither of which exist in reality, only in conceptual thought. Teaching number 2, there never was a body. That's right, Robert Adams hits hard. This is Advaita plus, guys. Not just you are not the body, but there never was a body. Here's why that distinction matters. This way of phrasing it hits your mind harder than just saying to yourself, I am not the body. Because your soul doesn't believe that when you say it. It works better as a mantra. Saying there never was a body really drives home the truth that the idea of body has always been a delusion. It doesn't just suddenly become unreal when you attain realization. It was always fake the whole time, a mental creation that we call a concept. And to clarify for those of you who have never heard this type of teaching before, when we say there is no body, we're not saying that there isn't a form constructed of molecules here. We're saying that to assign that form significance and meaning as a cohesive, unchanging entity is the delusion. And this delusion is what we all call body. Teaching number 3, keep your mind on reality and the body will take care of itself. To counteract the obstacle to remaining concentrated on reality, Robert teaches to stop being overly concerned and anxious about the body, and it will then see to its own well-being via a power called the current that knows the way. When you have the courage to believe this and dedicate your awareness to the path, the self takes over, bringing the right people into your life, the right situations, and the right addresses. And to avoid misunderstandings on this point, he clarifies, remember, I'm not saying you have to give up your job or not do things in this world. You've got a body and the body is going to do things. But mentally, you have to not be attached to what you are doing. Your body will know what to do and will do everything that is necessary for it to do. Be yourself. Continuing on, if you identify with your body, then there's a problem, because your body always gets into trouble of some kind. But if you learn to forget about your body and your mind, where is there a problem? In other words, leave your body alone. Take just enough care of it. Exercise it a little. Feed it right foods, but don't think about it too much. Keep your mind on reality. Merge your mind with reality, and you will experience reality. You will live in a world without problems. The world may appear to have problems to others, but not to you. You will see things differently from a higher point of view. Okay, and last point, number 4. You already are self-realized, already liberated. You are freedom. Quote, if you would only turn within and see the one self, then you would never worry about what is going to happen to you at all. For you would realize there is no you for anything to happen to. You are total freedom right now, total liberation, complete awareness. A very key point to remember, just as there was never a body, there never was a seeker in bondage to attain liberation. There is no person that gains enlightenment. It is enlightenment that realizes it is enlightened. The path is just a matter of uncovering that fact. An important application of this is to remember that all throughout your sadhana, if you don't stick to Atma Vichara of Jnana Yoga, watch out for the underlying idea that there is a real being doing these things to become liberated. Quote, all of these things, these sadhana, cause conflict. For aren't you saying, I'm doing these things to become liberated. I'm doing these things to become free. These are the conflict because you're already free and liberated. This is the only problem you have. And this conflict comes from programming when you were a child, from samskaras, from previous existence. There never was a you that has to suffer. There is nothing you have to become. There is no future for you to become anything. Right this moment, you are the one. Alright, so powerful quote there, and to strengthen this idea, he tells us that the reason we are in conflict is because we're trying to correct something, but that something does not really exist, and so we get nowhere. So that's my expose on Robert Adams, aka Bob the Guru, the enlightened American from Sedona, and his amazing book, Silence of the Heart, which I will link below if you want to pick up a copy. Now to close out, I would love to talk about his 4 principles for the Jnana Marga, the path of knowledge, otherwise known as Jnana Yoga. However, only if there is enough interest. So, if that sounds good to you, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what your favorite teaching is by Bob the Guru. Alright? Peace out.